Today we looked at the distributive property and how to use it to simplify expressions and also use it to solve equations. We're going to first start with this expression right here, and we're going to see that we're going to have to use a distributive property on it. If you remember, PEMDAS says we first have to look at what's inside the parentheses, and if you look at this, the 3 minus x, those are not like terms, which we learned yesterday, so we cannot combine those like terms. So we're going to move along in our PEMDAS order and look for multiplication. Here's some multiplication right here where we do 5 times, that's what the parenthesis means here when the 5 is written right by the parenthesis, 5 times, and we're going to do 5 times both terms that are in the parenthesis, and this is using the distributive property. Okay, so a negative 5 times a positive 3 is a negative 15. And then we have a negative 5, and remember the sign stays attached to the term behind it. So this is a negative x. So a negative 5 times a negative x is a positive 5x. Once we've completed the distributive property, we look again at our expression and make sure we cannot combine any of those terms. As we like to say in my class, they're not part of the same family. So we are done, and this expression is as simple as it gets. Right here, box it up, and we are done. We've just used the distributive property. Let's look at another example. Here's one that's a little bit more difficult with a few more terms. If you notice right here, I have an example of where I would use a distributive property, and then I'm going to add a 2x and add an 11. So let's highlight where I'm going to use a distributive property so I can just focus on that first. Alright, so the distributive property says I need to multiply the 8 times both terms that are inside the parentheses. Okay, so an 8 times an x is an 8x. Then 8 times a negative 9, remember the sign goes with the term behind it, is a negative 72. Now that I've completed my distributive property, I can take the rest of the terms that are in this expression and just bring them down. So plus 2x plus 11. Alright, so now looking at this, I notice that I have some members of the families that I can combine. So we're going to look for combining our like terms. So I have an 8x. The other member of the x family is the positive 2x. And that's it for the x family. Let's move on to our number family. We have a negative 72 and a positive 11. Alright, now that I've identified my family members, let's combine them. 8x plus 2x is 10x. I have a negative 72 and a positive 11. Now in class today we talked a little bit about algebra tiles and how red algebra tiles represent negative numbers. So this would be a set of red algebra tiles. So it would be 72 red ones. Here we have a positive 11, so they would be represented by the yellow. So we would have 11 yellow ones. Since we have two different color algebra tiles, we're going to subtract these two numbers. So 72 minus 11 gives me 61. Now to determine if it's positive or negative, I'm going to look for the bigger of the two numbers. So I have more red tiles. I have 72 red tiles, then I do yellow tiles, so that means my 61 is going to be negative. There we go, and we've just simplified that expression right there. Now, towards the end of class, we talked about how we can use a distributive property to solve equations, like this equation right here. I notice here that I have an example of where I'm going to use a distributive property, so I'm going to highlight, box that up. Okay, just so I focus only on that one. I also notice I have an equal sign. I'm going to draw my wall because before I work to solve and do the opposite operations, I need to simplify the left side of the equal sign. So I'm going to start with my distributive property. 8 times x and 8 times a negative 1 gives me 8x. And 8 times negative 1 is a negative 8. I'm done now with my distributive property, so I'm going to bring down the minus 2x equals 22. Okay, the next step is I'm going to look at this, each side of the wall or each side of the equal sign, and see if I can combine any of those terms. And I notice here that I have an 8x and a 2x. So I'm going to identify my like terms, or the terms that are a part of the same family, because they're both in the x family. And then this negative 8, he doesn't have anybody else to combine to, because he has no other family members hanging out on that side with him. So 8x minus 2x gives me a 6x. The negative 8 I'm just going to bring down, because like I said before, no other members of his family on that side, equals 22. Alright, I have a simplified expression on this side and just a regular number on this side, so let's start solving by doing my opposite operation. So add 8 to both sides. So this becomes 6x equals 30. Opposite operation of multiplication is division, so divide by 6. Divide by 6, x equals 5. And there I've just solved that equation using everything we've learned this week: our distributive property, combining like terms, and then opposite operations to solve our equations.